Welcome, traveler. Let the edges of your day begin to soften. The sharp lines of thought, the weight of memory, allow them all to dissolve into the quiet comfort of this moment. You are drifting now in that gentle liminal space between waking and dreaming, a place where the rules of reality grow soft and the veil between worlds becomes thin as mist. Feel a gentle pull, a faint shimmer in the air around you, as if you are being summoned not by a sound, but by an appointment you did not know you had. The familiar comfort of your room fades, replaced by a cool, profound darkness, a peaceful void. You are not alarmed. You are simply waiting. Suddenly the stillness is broken, not by a frightening crash, but by a distant, almost imperceptible rumble like thunder enjoying a very deep nap. Then a soft golden light begins to bloom in the darkness, revealing a figure reclining on what appears to be a cloud draped in silk and looking decidedly contemplative. He's not looking at you. He's staring wistfully at something just beyond your sight, a half-empty goblet of nectar held loosely in one hand. He lets out a long, theatrical sigh, a sound that vibrates through the very air, making the light around him ripple. It's the sigh of a being burdened not by cosmic duties, but by something far more personal. Another evening, Zeus murmurs to himself, his voice deep, resonant, and carrying the faintest echo of a distant storm. One might think that being the king of Olympus, with all the power and endless feasts, would bring a certain serenity. But no. Even on this glorious peak, one finds oneself contemplating the eternal question, what now? He finally shifts, turning his head slightly, his eyes impossibly ancient and twinkling with a mix of weariness and mischief land on you. He blinks slowly. Then a faint smile, dry and knowing, touches his lips. Well, well, he says, his voice losing its melancholic edge and gaining a touch of wry amusement. Look what the cosmic winds blew in. A new face, and quite a stable one if I do say so myself. Not prone to spontaneous combustion, I trust. Good. That saves on paperwork. You're here then. He gestures for you to come closer with a gentle hand. Not by my express invitation, perhaps, but the fates do enjoy their little detours. And since you're already privy to my most profound evening musings, perhaps you'd care to hear more. After all, a god's personal life is far more entertaining than any battle, I assure you. And certainly less likely to involve actual lightning. Unless, of course, Hera is involved. But we'll get to that. Consider it a rare behind-the-scenes glimpse into the life of a god who, despite all his power, still manages to trip over his own affections. Just relax. Let the stories flow. And perhaps find a little humor in the grand, chaotic tapestry of existence. This is Sleep Among Titans. And you, dear listener, are exactly where you're meant to be. If your eyes are still open, welcome. If they're starting to close, that's perfect too. The story will wait. It always has. And if this night brings you calm, I'd love to know. Leave a whisper in the comments. Or simply subscribe. Leave a lantern lit so the next dream can find you. A deep sigh escapes his lips, a sound less like wind and more like the shifting of ancient stone. Always the same, he mutters to himself, his voice a low rumble that seems to vibrate in the very air around him. The hum. It never ever stops. He shifts his immense weight on the throne, the movement slow and deliberate. His gaze heavy with the weight of eons drifts from the tapestry of distant stars and finally settles on you. There is no surprise in his eyes, only a long, quiet assessment. Then a faint smile, dry and knowing, touches his lips. Well now, he says, his voice losing its melancholic edge and gaining a touch of wry amusement. A visitor, and a quiet one at that. A refreshing change from the usual supplicants. He gestures with a slight tilt of his head to the empty space beside his throne. Come, don't be shy. The view is comprehensive. And the silence is a rare commodity even for a god. As you settle into the profound stillness, he leans slightly closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. That sound, he begins, the one you almost feel more than hear, that low, constant vibration in the very fabric of the cosmos. He pauses, letting you listen to the near imperceptible frequency. That is the collective sigh of humanity. Millions of little hopes, fears, and demands, all bundled together into a single eternal headache. He smirks. Most are predictable, of course. Please let my crops grow. Please let my neighbor's crops fail. Please let me find my lost goat. The goat-related prayers are my favorite, I must admit. They have a certain purity of purpose. His humor fades, replaced by that ancient weariness. But the prayers are the easy part. It's the noise behind the prayers, the unspoken jealousies, the quiet triumphs, the lonely heartbeats in the dead of night. It all flows here, to me. The poets would have you believe my power is in the thunder I command. A lovely bit of theater, isn't it? But the real power and the real prison is that I am forced to listen to it all, ceaselessly, eternally. The faint cosmic hum seems to quieten for a moment. Zeus, who had been looking at you now, turns his gaze towards the star-dusted expanse beyond the columns of his hall. It's as if he is looking right through you, his focus on something impossibly distant. The universe itself seems to swirl within his ancient eyes. But the listening, he says, his voice a low murmur that barely disturbs the profound silence of the peak that is only half of the equation. The noise is a burden, yes, but the other half is the seeing. And that my quiet friend is a far heavier weight to bear. He raises a hand, not in a gesture of command, but as if tracing something in the air that only he can perceive. Mortals tell stories of the Moirai, the fates, 3 old crones who spin measure and snip the threads of life in some hidden cave. It's a quaint story. It gives them comfort to imagine their destiny is at least woven with care. He lets out another of those soft, rumbling chuckles. The truth is less theatrical and far more relentless. I do not see 3 women. I see the loom itself. It is the universe. And the threads are not made of wool or flax. They are threads of starlight, of possibility, of life itself shimmering in the great silent dark. I see them emerge from the void at the moment of birth, glowing with a unique color. Some a brilliant gold, some a soft silver, others a simple earthy brown. I watch them stretch across time, weaving through triumphs and tragedies, intertwining with other threads in patterns both beautiful and terrible. He lets his hand fall back to the arm of his throne. And I see the end of every single thread. There is no snip of celestial scissors. There is only a quiet fizzle like a star going out. A soft final dimming, and then it is gone, and a new thread appears. Do you know what it is like to look upon a newborn child, its face pink and crumpled, and in the very same instant see the old stooped man? He will become, his hands gnarled with arthritis. To see the love he will find the children, he will raise the quiet afternoon, he will die in his sleep, all at once. Not as a sequence, but as a single complete picture, a finished tapestry. It robs the moment of its purity. The joy of the beginning is forever tainted by the sorrow of the end. He gestures vaguely towards the mortal world, a swirling nebula of light and shadow far below. I watch a young hero full of fire and ambition set out on a grand quest. He believes his will is his own, his courage, his strength. These he thinks will shape his fate. But I can already see the thread of his life, and I see the fatal flaw woven into it from the start. I see the hubris that will lead to his downfall, the trusted friend who will betray him, the tragic misunderstanding that will cost him everything he loves. They call me the decider. But what am I deciding when the pattern is already laid bare before me? Sometimes I feel less like a king and more like the sole captive audience to a play that has already been written, forced to watch it unfold over and over again. It makes the dramas of this place, he says, waving a hand to indicate the whole of Olympus, so exquisitely tedious. Hera approaches me, her face a mask of fury. She's about to accuse me of some new infidelity. But I saw the thought form in her mind before she felt the anger. I see the entire argument, every bitter word, every feigned apology before it even begins. Ares boasts of a battle he plans to win, but I already see his legions broken, his banner trampled in the mud. I must feign surprise. I must pretend to consider his foolish strategies. It is a performance, an endless divine performance, and I am the only one who knows all the lines. He falls silent for a long moment, the weight of that eternal knowledge seeming to press down upon him. To see everything is to be robbed of hope, of surprise, of the simple, beautiful gift of not knowing. It is to be a perpetual outsider to the very world you oversee. For who can you share a genuine moment with when you have already seen how all of their moments end? Zeus remains silent for a long while, his gaze lost in the void. Then, with a movement that seems to take an eternity, he rises from the throne. The scale of him is immense, yet he moves with a profound weariness. He walks not towards the grand empty halls of the palace, but to the very edge of the precipice, where the polished marble gives way to nothing but swirling clouds and distant silent stars. This throne, he says, his back to you, his voice a quiet current in the vast stillness. Mortals, and even the younger gods, imagine it is the ultimate seat of power. They are mistaken. It is not a throne. It is an island, and I am its sole inhabitant. He gestures down into the infinite darkness below, where the mortal world is a barely visible tapestry of faint lights. Look, down there. His voice softens, losing its regal tone and taking on a note of something you cannot quite place. A longing. Do you see that tiny flickering point of gold that is a hearth? A family is gathered around it. A father has just told a terrible joke. His children are laughing a real unburdened sound. The mother is smiling, shaking her head. They are sharing bread. In their small, fragile world in that moment, they are everything to each other. They are a community. I envy them that small warmth. I envy them their jokes, their shared meals, their simple, profound togetherness. I could descend, of course. I could appear as a weary traveler, and they in their piety would offer me the best seat by their fire. But I would not be a guest. I would be a god in disguise, and the knowing would still be there. I would see the sickness that will take the father in 10 years. I would hear the secret wish in the mother's heart for a life she never had. I would know the exact day the children's laughter will turn to tears. The honesty of their small, perfect moment would curdle in my presence. And so, I can only watch. From here. Always from here. He turns from the precipice, his shadow stretching long across the marble floor. And up here. He lets out a dry, mirthless laugh. Up here is no better. We call ourselves a family. We hold feasts in these great halls, the nectar flows like water, and Apollo's lyre fills the air with music so beautiful it could make the stars weep. But it is all a performance. I sit at the head of the table, and I see it all not as a father, but as a warden. I see Poseidon raising his cup to me in a toast, but I feel the tremor of resentment in his heart for the sea he was given instead of the sky. I see Apollo and Artemis exchange a clever remark, but I sense the ancient sharp-edged rivalry that always simmers just beneath the surface. I see Hermes, my quick-witted messenger, smiling, but I know his thoughts are 1,000 miles away, already plotting some new mischief. And I see Hera. He pauses, and the air around you seems to grow colder, heavier. The weariness in his voice deepens into a raw, ancient pain. I see Hera, my wife, my queen, watching me, and in her eyes I see a love so twisted with betrayal, and a loyalty so corroded by pain that it has become its own form of eternal punishment for us both. We sit at the same table, but we dine in different worlds. How can you have a conversation with someone when you already know every word they will say, every accusation they will make, every tear they will not shed? To be alone is one thing. Mortals feel it often a fleeting shadow in a crowded room. But to be singular, that is another matter entirely. There is no one in all of creation to whom I can turn and say, "Do you understand?" No one who knows the sheer crushing boredom of eternity. No one who feels the weight of 1,000,000,000 silent stars on their shoulders. This solitude, it is the price of the crown. It is the emptiness this power was meant to fill. And perhaps he adds his voice now, barely a whisper. It is why the fleeting, fragile lives of mortals have always seemed so alluring. Their brief, shining moments are the one thing I can observe but never truly possess. He walks slowly back to the throne, not as a king returning to his seat of power, but as a prisoner returning to his cell. It was always meant to be this way, I suppose. A kingdom won in a great and terrible war against your own kin is not a foundation for fellowship. It is a foundation for vigilance. And vigilance is a very lonely vigil indeed. The profound silence on the peak of Olympus deepens. Zeus, who had been an island of weary stillness, seems to recede even further into himself. The starlight in his ancient eyes softens the cosmic vista, replaced by a different, warmer light, the flickering glow of a torch in a deep earthen cave. The cold, thin air around his throne seems to hum with the memory of a gentler time scented with wild thyme and the rich aroma of goat's milk. Before all of this, he says, and his voice is different now, stripped of its cynicism, holding instead the remembered vulnerability of youth. He gestures with a sweep of his hand that encompasses the silent marble halls and the star-dusted sky. Before the throne, before the thunder, before the name that would echo with fear and reverence, there was darkness. Not the peaceful darkness of night, but a living, breathing darkness. A prison of flesh. But my first memories were of light. I was a child on Crete, hidden from the world. My cradle was a shield of gold hung from a tree so that my father could not find me in the sky, on the earth, or in the sea. The nymphs Adrasteia and Ida were my mothers, their laughter the first music I knew. The milk I drank was from the goat Amalthea, and the Curetes armed warriors would dance and clash their spears to drown out the sound of my crying. It was an idyllic prison, but a prison nonetheless. I knew nothing of my lineage. I only knew the sun, the mountain, and the endless gentle love of those who protected me. He pauses, a faint sad smile touching his lips. I was happy. It is a strange thing to remember that feeling. A simple, uncomplicated happiness. I did not know I was a god. I only knew that I was strong and that the sky seemed to listen when I shouted with joy. I did not know that my joy was a secret, a treasonous act against the king of the universe. That King Zeus, continues his voice hardening almost imperceptibly, was my father, Cronus, a name my mother Rhea would only speak in whispers, her eyes wide with a terror so ancient it seemed a part of her very being. One day, when I had grown tall and the power within me began to feel less like play and more like a gathering storm, she came to me in the deepest part of the cave. She told me the truth. She told me of my brothers and my sisters, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, names that were alien to me, yet they resonated in my soul like a half-forgotten song. They were my family, and they were gone. His voice drops, becoming thick with the horror of the memory. She told me they were not dead, that I think would have been a mercy. They were trapped. Swallowed whole at the moment of their birth, held captive in the endless churning darkness within the Father who should have protected them. They were alive, conscious, alone. An eternity of falling without landing, of screaming without sound. Imagine it. The first sensation of your existence being the suffocating grip of your father's throat. I tried. I sat in that dark cave and tried to imagine their fate, and for the first time in my immortal life I felt true cold. It was fear. What could I, a boy raised on milk and honey, do against the Titan who had devoured his own children and now ruled the cosmos with an iron hand? My mother's story was a call to arms, but all I felt was the trembling of a child. I was not a king. I was not a savior. I was just a secret. He rises from his throne and walks again to the edge of the peak, as if the memory is too vast to contain while sitting still. But Rhea, my mother, had not just brought me a story of despair. She had brought me a plan. A desperate, fragile plan that hinged on a mother's cunning and a son's courage. She told me I would go to my father's court, not as his son, but as a cupbearer. I would serve him. I would gain his trust. And then I would give him a potion, a mixture of wine and mustard she had concocted that would force him to release his prisoners. And to take my place in the swallowing, she had a stone. I remember holding it. It was just a simple gray rock, but it felt heavier than all of Mount Ida. She wrapped it in swaddling clothes, just as she had once wrapped my siblings. The irony was as bitter as the potion I was to serve. To save my family, I had to become a traitor. I had to deceive my own father, the king of all things. The fear never left me. It was a cold fire in my gut as I traveled to his court. It was there when I first knelt before him, this immense paranoid god whose eyes held the emptiness of a starless sky. I served him his nectar. I watched him feast. And all the while I could almost hear them, the silent screams from within him. That sound gave me strength. The fear remained, but something else grew alongside it, a resolve as hard and as cold as the stone my mother had given me. The moment came. I poured the potion into his goblet. My hand did not shake. He drank. And then, we waited. In that silence, the universe held its breath. In that moment, I was no longer a boy hiding in a cave. I was an avenger, a rescuer, a king in the making. But I did not know then, as I watched my father's face contort in agony, that in freeing my family, I was merely forging the first links of my own eternal chains. Zeus turns away from the precipice, a profound and terrible memory clouding his features. The phantom torchlight of the Cretan cave is gone, replaced by the memory of a light far more savage. The gentle wind that whispers around Olympus seems to die down, and in the silence you can almost feel a distant, discordant vibration, the echo of a war that shook the very firmament of existence. The sound he made. Zeus begins his voice low and strained when he was forced to release them. It was not the sound of a god, but of a world breaking. And what emerged from that terrible darkness was not a grateful family, but 5 ghosts pale and trembling, their eyes unaccustomed to the light, having known nothing but the prison of their father's flesh. Hestia the eldest was silent, her stillness a shield against the horror she had endured. Demeter wept for a son she had never seen. Hera's eyes were already filled with a pride that had been wounded before it could ever bloom. And my brothers Poseidon and Hades were filled with a rage and a gloom that would come to define them. They were my siblings, my allies. But we were strangers bound not by love, but by a shared trauma and a common enemy, our own father. Thus began the war, the Titanomachy, 10 years. For mortals, a decade is the space between youth and middle age. For gods, it is but a breath. But those 10 years, they were an eternity. The Titans, our elders, ruled from Mount Othrys. We, the new gods, made our fortress here on Olympus. And the space between was a wound in creation. It was not a war of shining armor and noble cavalry, as your poets sing. It was a cosmic brawl, a sickness in reality itself. Imagine the sound of mountains being torn from their roots and thrown across the sky. Imagine the shrieking of the very air as it was ripped apart by divine energies. There was no strategy, no honor. It was pure, unrestrained power crashing against itself. We would shake the heavens. They would shatter the earth. Day and night lost all meaning in the endless churning twilight of our conflict. It was a war fought in a state of perpetual exhaustion, a fever that would not break. After 10 years of stalemate, I knew we could not win with our own strength. Victory required older, darker allies. My mother Rhea told me of them, my uncles, the Cyclopes, and the Hundred-Handers who had been cast into Tartarus by our father's paranoia long ago. I had to descend. I had to go down into the blackest pit of creation, a place from which no light escaped. The journey was a descent into absolute fear. But when I found them, I did not find monsters. I found prisoners. The Cyclopes, masters of the forge, their single eyes burning with a grief as old as the mountains. The Hundred-Handers, their immense power bound in chains. I went not as a king demanding tribute, but as a nephew asking for help. I offered them freedom. They in turn offered me their craft and their rage. Zeus looks down at his empty hands as if he can still feel the memory of the weapon they once held. They forged 3 gifts. A helmet of darkness for Hades, a trident that could command the seas for Poseidon. And for me, they forged this. He gestures to the dormant lightning bolt resting by his throne. It was not a weapon of glory. It was a tool of absolute destruction. A piece of the chaotic fire that existed before the world was given shape, now contained in my hand. With these new powers, and with the Hundred-Handers hurling hundreds of boulders at once, the tide turned. The sky screamed with lightning. The earth buckled under the force of the sea. The darkness of the underworld itself rose up. It was a nightmare, and it was our victory. We ended a war by unleashing chaos. When the final Titan fell, the universe was silent. But it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of utter devastation, the silence of a broken home. We had won the sky, but we had filled it with the ghosts of our own family. The memory of cosmic violence fades from Olympus, replaced by a silence that feels heavier and more profound than any sound. Zeus is standing now, his back to the throne, looking out over a universe that is finally terribly still. He does not carry himself like a conqueror. He looks like a son who has just witnessed the fall of his entire house, only to find himself the sole heir to its ruins. Victory, he says, and the word is flat, devoid of triumph, like a stone dropped into a bottomless well. A strange, empty word. What is victory when your enemy shares your blood? It is not a celebration. It is simply the end of the fighting and the beginning of the sentencing. The great titans were defeated. My father, Cronus, who had ruled existence with a paranoid fist, was now kneeling before me. His power was broken, his eyes holding not defiance, but a vast, weary emptiness. I looked at him, and I did not see the monster who had swallowed his children. I saw my father. I saw the god whose power I had inherited, whose tyranny I had vowed to end, only to find myself faced with a tyrant's choice. My siblings, their freedom still so new and raw, demanded retribution. Their voices were sharp with the memory of their long imprisonment. They wanted the titans to suffer as they had suffered. They wanted them cast into the pit. And I understood their rage. It was a fire that burned in my own heart. But as I looked at the defeated gods, my uncles, my aunts, my father, I felt something other than hatred. I felt a profound, aching sorrow. What was I to do? To free them would be to invite another war. Their pride was as boundless as their power. They would never accept my rule. The cosmos could not survive another decade of such conflict. It was still healing its wounds, raw and deep. But to imprison them, to cast my own kin into the eternal darkness of Tartarus, that would make me no better than the father I had just deposed. It would make me a jailer, a son who condemns his own father to an eternity of darkness. He turns from the edge of the peak and begins to walk slowly, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence of the hall. In the end, the choice was not a choice at all. It was an inevitability. For the sake of order, for the sake of this new fragile peace, there could be no rivals. I made the decree. I led the procession myself, not with triumph, but with the grim solemnity of a funeral director. I escorted my father to the great bronze gates of Tartarus. He did not struggle. He did not speak. He only looked at me once, and in his eyes, I saw not a monster, but a king who understood the terrible calculus of power. The gates closed with a sound that I can still hear in the quietest hours of the night, a final booming clang that sealed my father in the darkness and sealed away the last of my youth with him. With the titans gone, a new problem arose. Power once seized is a poison. It breeds mistrust. I looked at my brothers Poseidon and Hades, their eyes burning with their own ambitions, and I saw the future another war. A new generation of gods fighting over the spoils. We needed order, or we would simply become the next dynasty to devour our own. And so I proposed a solution. Not a command, but a compromise. We would not fight for the world. We would divide it. By lot. A game of chance to decide the fate of creation. It was a risk, but it was a risk that offered peace. It seemed fitting in a way. The universe had been born from chaos. Perhaps it was only right that its rule be decided by it. He reaches the throne but does not sit. He simply runs a hand over the cold star-flecked stone. Poseidon, ever tempestuous, drew the seas a realm as wild and untamable as his own heart. Hades, quiet and somber, drew the vast, silent kingdom of the underworld, a realm of order and finality that suited his grim disposition. He accepted his lot without complaint. I believe in his own way he was relieved to be free of the endless dramas of the world above. And I was left with the sky. This empty, vast, beautiful sky. And the throne that came with it. I remember the moment I first sat here after the lots were cast. My brothers had departed to their new kingdoms. My sisters were finding their own places in the new order. The great halls of Olympus for the first time were silent. The war was over. The realms were divided. I had won. Everything I had fought for was mine, and I had never in all my long immortal existence felt so utterly alone. This then was the true price of the crown. Not the blood spilled in the war, but the silence that followed. I had fought to free my family from a prison of flesh, only to find myself the solitary king of an empty palace, ruler of a silent sky. I had traded one form of darkness for another, a solitude so vast, so complete, it has a weight all its own, a silence that has lasted to this day. Zeus remains standing at the edge of the Olympian peak, but his focus has shifted. It is no longer outward to the cosmos, nor inward to the memories of war. It is now directed downward, as if he is listening to the very heartbeat of the world below. The air around him seems to shimmer, not with power, but with a quiet ancient energy that feels far older than he is. There are places in the world where creation is thin, he says, his voice taking on a new, more reverent tone. Places where the veil between what is, what was, and what could be is as fragile as a spider's silk touched by dew. Mortals are drawn to these places. They feel the energy, even if they do not understand it. They build temples there. They give them names. One such place, the most potent of them, all they call Delphi. Do not picture the temple as your mortal artists do a monument of white marble and gold gleaming under a Grecian sun. That is merely the shell the beautiful cage built to contain something wild and untamable. To understand Delphi, you must picture a wound in the earth, a deep fissure in the rock of Mount Parnassus, from which the planet itself, Gaia, exhales her ancient sleeping dreams. He closes his eyes as if inhaling a phantom scent. The vapors. They rise from the chasm, colorless and shimmering, carrying not the scent of sulfur, but the aroma of crushed laurel leaves, damp earth, and something else. Something metallic and green, like the taste of a forgotten truth on the tongue. This is the breath of the world. It is a voice that spoke long before my reign, long before the Titans. It is the chaos of prophecy, and it can shatter a mortal mind. At the heart of the sanctuary lies a stone, the omphalos, which mortals believe marks the navel of the world. A pretty notion. In truth, it is an anchor. A focal point I placed there myself to help contain and concentrate the power, lest it spread across the land like a maddening plague. The earth's voice is strongest there. It is a place of immense power and immense danger. He opens his eyes, a look of paternal complexity within them, a mixture of pride and pity. It is why I placed my son Apollo there. My golden son, the god of light, of music, of reason, of clarity. I tasked him with being the guardian of this place, a terrible burden in truth to assign to a god of clarity. It is his eternal duty to stand at the edge of that chasm of madness and translate the chaotic, formless whispers of the earth into something mortals can almost understand. He must give rhythm to the unrhythmic, shape to the shapeless. He must turn a cosmic scream into a structured poetic verse. He is the master of the oracle, they say. He is not. He is its first and most dedicated servant. He presides over the chaos, but he does not control it. He is a brilliant musician forced to play an instrument that is forever changing its tune, an instrument that was never meant to be played at all. He brings the light of his reason to a place that is born of primordial darkness. And the strain of that contradiction, I see it in him. I sometimes believe it is the cruelest task I have ever assigned to one of my children. Zeus turns to you, his expression unreadable. You see, we Olympians, we did not create this power. We inherited it, or rather we conquered it. Before Apollo, the voice of that chasm had a different guardian, the Python, a great serpentine child of the earth itself. My son had to slay that ancient beast to claim the site for our new order. But you do not kill the voice of the world. You only force it to speak in a different dialect. The ancient power is still there, coiled and dreaming in the darkness beneath the stone, whispering its truths through the mouth of a mortal woman. I can command the sky. I can see the threads of mortal fate as they are woven. But here is a truth that does not answer to me. It is a power that belongs to the planet to time itself. It is a constant humbling reminder that even the king of the gods is merely a guest in a universe far older and more mysterious than he can ever truly comprehend. And for a god, my friend, there is no feeling more unsettling or more necessary than humility. Zeus remains at the edge of Olympus, his gaze still fixed on the distant conceptual point of Delphi. His expression, which had held a kind of reverent humility, now shifts into something more complex, a deep, almost paternal pity. He is no longer contemplating the raw power of the earth. He is contemplating the fragile human vessel forced to contain it. A power like that, the voice of the world itself, it is too much for any one mind to hold divine or mortal. It is too vast, too chaotic. It requires a conduit, a vessel to give it a fleeting human shape. Mortals come from all over the world to hear her speak. They call her the Pythia. They see her as a queen of secrets, a woman blessed by my son Apollo, touched by the gods and gifted with foresight. They bring her offerings of gold and laurel wreaths, and they bow before her as she sits upon her sacred tripod, a blessing. He shakes his head slowly, the movement filled with an ancient sadness. No. It is a sacrifice. Every woman who takes up that title sacrifices her own mind upon the altar of cosmic truth. She is, I believe, the loneliest woman in all of Greece. I have watched generations of them. They are always young women chosen for their purity. They prepare themselves for days. They bathe in the waters of the Castalian spring, a water so cold and pure it feels like drinking liquid stone. They chew the leaves of the sacred laurel, their bitterness meant to cleanse the palate for the taste of truth. They enter the inner sanctum, the Adyton, a small dark chamber built directly over the chasm. His voice drops, becoming a hushed, intimate whisper, as if he is describing a sacred and terrible rite. And then the vapors rise. The breath of Gaia. It is not a gentle mist. It is a deluge. Imagine, if you can, every truth that has ever been, every possibility that might yet be, every forgotten dream, and every future sorrow screaming through your mind all at once. It does not come as a vision. It comes as a flood, a torrent of pure information shattering thought into 1,000 glittering, incoherent fragments. The woman on the tripod. She is no longer herself. Her body convulses. Her eyes roll back. And the sounds that escape her lips, they are not words. They are the raw syntax of creation. The groaning of a star being born, the sigh of a mountain collapsing into dust, the hiss of a serpent devouring its own tail. She babbles of light and shadow of blood and water of a lion with the head of a goat, of a crown that burns. It is pure, unfiltered truth. And pure truth, my friend, is a form of madness. And then Zeus continues, a note of weary frustration entering his voice. Then come the priests. The men in their neat, clean robes with their sharp styluses and their smooth wax tablets. They stand in the shadows listening to this cosmic static, and they attempt to translate it. They are like men trying to catch a hurricane in a teacup. They pluck a word from the torrent here, a fragmented image there. They listen to her screams and her whispers, and from that madness they try to build a cage of logic. They stitch these divine fragments together, forcing them into the rigid, clumsy shape of a hexameter verse. They polish the madness until it looks like wisdom. They take a scream of terror and shape it into a metaphor about a coming storm. They take a sob of despair and call it a warning about a fickle harvest. They are not prophets. They are editors, and they are more often than not poets of mediocre talent. He turns to you, a wry, tired smile on his face. And the mortals, the kings and the farmers who have traveled for months for their moment of truth, they take these cryptic, polished verses as the literal word of a god. They crave certainty. They come to that holy place seeking a map for their future, a simple yes or no. But the universe does not speak in simple terms. It speaks in possibilities, in echoes. I remember the tale of Croesus, the wealthy king of Lydia. He was a proud man, his mind full of war and conquest. He came to the temple, his offering coffers overflowing, and he asked the oracle a simple question: should he attack the great Persian Empire? The Pythia, in her divine fit, spoke of fire and rivers and a fallen kingdom. And the priests, after much deliberation, gave Croesus their neat little answer: if you cross the river, A great empire will be destroyed. Zeus pauses, letting the infamous ambiguity hang in the air. A perfect prophecy. Poetic, ominous, and utterly tragically true. Croesus, blinded by his own ambition, heard only what he wanted to hear. He crossed the river. He attacked. And a great empire was indeed destroyed. His own. This is the nature of the oracle. It does not give answers. It gives reflections. And mortals gazing into that shimmering, chaotic pool of truth more often than not are simply horrified by their own image staring back at them. The air on the peak of Olympus seems to grow heavy, charged with an unspoken ancient question. Zeus turns his full attention to you, but his gaze is distant, as if he is not merely speaking to you, but confessing to the silent watching cosmos itself. His earlier weariness has now been sharpened by a raw, vulnerable edge. Mortals travel to Delphi seeking guidance for their fleeting lives. He begins his voice now a quiet, resonant whisper that seems to be absorbed by the cold marble around you. They ask about their harvests, their wars, their children. They tremble before the fragmented truths that the oracle offers them. But have you ever stopped to wonder, quiet visitor? What happens when the oracle speaks of the gods? What happens when it whispers a prophecy not about a mortal king, but about the king of Olympus? What happens? When it whispers about me, he does not wait for an answer. The question hangs in the air, vast and terrifying. It is the curse of my bloodline, a bitter inheritance passed down through the ages. The son is destined to usurp the father. It is the law of our chaotic divine nature. My father Cronus did it to his father Uranos. And the fates in their eternal cruel poetry decreed that I would face the same threat. That a child of my own would one day rise to overthrow me, to cast me down into the same darkness to which I condemned my own kin. For a long time this was just a shadow in the back of my mind, a cold whisper on the edge of my hearing. But then, there was Metis. He speaks her name with a reverence that is startling, a softness that you have not heard in his voice before. It is the sound of a wound that has never healed. Her name meant wisdom, and she was its living embodiment. A titaness, yes, but her mind was a thing of beauty, a shining constellation of thought and cunning. She was my first wife, and I loved her. In her, for a brief, glorious time, I believed I had found an equal. Someone whose mind could dance with mine, who could see the patterns in the chaos as I did. We were to build a new order together, one founded not just on power, but on wisdom. But the whispers grew louder. The voice of Gaia from the chasm at Delphi, the shimmering threads of fate I see with my own eyes. They all began to sing the same terrible, discordant song. They sang of a child to be born from our union. A daughter first, and then a son. A son whose power and wisdom would be so great that he would eclipse the sky. A son who would take this throne from me. Zeus walks to his throne and runs a hand over its cold, hard arm. He looks at it not as a king, but as a man looking at the instrument of his own potential execution. And the fear that I had inherited from my father, the fear of being unseated, of being forgotten, of being imprisoned in the dark. It began to consume me. It was a cold poison, turning my love for Metis into a source of terror. The wisdom she offered now seemed like a threat. The child she carried, my child, became my doom. So I did the unthinkable, the unforgivable. I did not devour her in a fit of rage as Cronus had devoured my siblings. No, my crime was colder, more calculated. I used the very thing I loved about her, her intelligence, her cleverness, against her. I praised her skill at transformation. I challenged her to a game to see how small she could make herself. And she, in her trust, in her love for me, accepted. She shifted her form from a lioness to a serpent to a drop of water, until she was as small as a fly. He pauses, his jaw tightening, his eyes shutting as if to block out the memory. And I swallowed her whole. The confession lands in the silent air with the weight of a fallen mountain. I told myself it was for the good of the cosmos, that it was to prevent another divine war, that it was to maintain the order I had fought so hard to create. Lies. All of it. It was an act of pure selfish terror. In that moment, I became my father. I chose power over love. I chose eternal vigilance over a moment of trust, and I have lived with the consequences ever since. I absorbed her, and so I absorbed her wisdom. But I also absorbed my own damnation. My daughter Athena was later born directly from my head, a searing headache that split my skull apart. My brilliant gray-eyed daughter, the goddess of wisdom and warfare. She is my greatest pride and my most constant living shame. She is a reminder of the wisdom I consumed and the love I destroyed. This is the heart of my burden, you see. It is not the prayers nor the endless wars of mortals. It is this knowledge. I see the threads of fate. I see the entire tapestry of time laid out before me. The oracle at Delphi with its cryptic verses is like a single loose thread that a mortal is allowed to pull, getting a brief, tangled, and often misleading glimpse of the grand pattern. They see a fragment. I see the whole inescapable design. So tell me, you who have come to listen to the secrets of a god, which is the greater curse, to be blind to your fate, living out your days in the sweet, beautiful illusion of free will, or to see the bars of your own cage in perfect, agonizing detail, to know the end of every song before the first note is even played. That is why I am as I am. My thunder is not the easy rage of a tyrant. It is the roar of a caged animal trying to convince the world and myself that I am still in control of the script. My intolerance for defiance is not arrogance. It is the desperate, unending effort to prevent a single thread from straying, to stop a prophecy that I fear is already in motion. And so I sit on this throne, this island of stone, and I watch. I listen to the whispers from the earth, and I wait. I who am called the king of gods and men am in truth the most attentive prisoner of fate. The poets were right about one thing. A prophecy still hangs over me. And every day I look upon my own brilliant, ambitious children, Apollo, Ares, Hermes, Athena, and I wonder which one carries the seed of my destruction. Is this the day the next act begins, or is the waiting? This endless, silent, lonely waiting, the true and final punishment. The heavy silence of Zeus's kingship seems to lift for a moment, replaced by a different, sharper ache. It is not the burden of power, but the ache of a profound and eternal longing. He turns his gaze from the cold stars down to the world of mortals, a scattered collection of warm, flickering lights. A faint smile, this one laced not with irony, but with genuine sorrow, touches his lips. They call me a philanderer, he says, his voice losing its thunderous undertone and becoming something softer, more confessional. A creature of uncontrollable lust, a god who collects hearts like a mortal boy collects seashells. It is an easy, simple explanation for my transgressions, and like all simple explanations for the actions of a god, it is profoundly, almost insultingly wrong. You must understand what it is to be as we are. Our emotions, our very beings, are like the marble of this palace, grand, powerful, and eternal. My rage can shake the foundations of the world. Hera's jealousy is a thing of terrible crystalline perfection. Poseidon's moods are a tempest that can swallow fleets, but they are cold. They are static. They do not change. They simply are. An eternal, unchanging state of being. We are glaciers, magnificent and frozen in our own grandeur. But a mortal's feelings. He leans forward slightly, as if sharing a great secret. They are like a fire in a hearth on a cold night. They blaze. They crackle with life. They throw off a warmth so real, so vibrant, it can be felt across the cosmos. Their joy is brilliant because it is born from sorrow. Their love is fierce because they know in their bones that it will end. Their grief is profound because it is the price of that love. Their lives are a wildfire, a fleeting, passionate, all-consuming burn that illuminates the darkness for a short, beautiful time before turning to ash. For millennia, I have been cold, and I have found myself time and time again drawn to their fire. It is not their bodies I crave, not truly. It is their fragility. It is the breathtaking beauty of their mortality. Do you know what a strange thing it is for the king of all creation to envy a simple farmer weeping at his wife's grave? He weeps because he has lost something irreplaceable. His grief is a testament to the depth of his love. My losses are cosmic inconveniences. His is a shattered heart. I envy him that pain. It is real. It has meaning. He begins to pace slowly along the edge of the peak, his form a great shadow against the stars. And so I try to get closer, to shed this heavy skin of godhood if only for an afternoon. I become something else, something simpler. You have heard the stories of my transformations. The poets paint them as deceitful tricks to seduce unsuspecting women. And perhaps they are. But they are also an escape for me. I became a great white bull to approach the Princess Europa. They speak of it as an abduction, but I remember the feeling of the sun on my hide, the salt spray of the sea as I swam, and the sound of her laughter, pure and unafraid, as she clung to my back. For that one afternoon, I was not the king of the gods burdened by 1,000 silent prayers. I was just an animal, powerful and simple, moved by the beauty of a mortal girl. Of course, he adds a dry, self-deprecating smirk, appearing it is remarkably difficult to maintain one's regal bearing when one is trying not to trip over one's own hooves. The dignity of the moment is often precarious. Or I become a swan to visit the beautiful Leda. The poets write of its divine grace. They neglect to mention the sheer indignity of preening one's feathers for an hour, or the rather foolish way a swan must waddle upon the land. But to fly, to feel the wind lift you, to be a creature of pure mindless instinct, moved only by the sight of beauty. For a moment I could forget that I was Zeus. I was just a being drawn to another. And then there was Danae, my lonely prisoner, locked away in her tower of bronze. How could I reach her without terrifying her? My true form would have turned her to dust. So I became an idea. A shower of golden light seeping through the cracks in her prison. It sounds magnificent in the telling, does it not? In reality, it was quite abstract. All flash and very little substance. And frankly, he says with a final weary sigh, it was quite drafty. Each time the goal was the same. To touch their world. To feel that fleeting mortal warmth. To be a part of their beautiful burning fire. But the disguise always fades. The god within always re-emerges, and I am left with nothing but the memory of a warmth I can never truly hold, and they are left with the chaos and the sorrow that a god's presence always leaves in its wake. It is not lust that drives me, quiet visitor. It is a hunger for what is real, and it is a hunger that I have come to realize over countless lonely centuries can never truly be sated. The faint memory of Zeus's hunger and his fleeting transformations fades, and the air on Olympus grows still once more. He stops his pacing. He stands in the center of the great empty hall and looks into the middle distance as if viewing a series of invisible portraits hanging in the air. His expression is no longer one of longing, but of deep, quiet sorrow. He is a curator, walking through a gallery of his own making, and his face reflects the tragedy of each masterpiece. A gallery of heartbreak. He murmurs, his voice a low echo in the cavernous space. That is what my long life has built. The poets sing of my great loves. They are wrong. There were no great loves. There were only great beginnings followed by terrible, inevitable ends. They are not paintings of passion. They are maps of sorrow, each one showing how a single stone dropped by my hand into the placid waters of time created waves that shattered distant shores. Come. Let me show you the wreckage. He turns his gaze to the first invisible portrait. We shall begin with Europa. I see her still on the sun-drenched shores of Phoenicia, weaving flowers into garlands, her laughter so pure, it seemed to be the very sound of sunlight. It was her freedom. I was drawn to a spirit as untamed as the sea. I became a bull, and for one perfect afternoon, we were both free, a myth in the making. But what happens after the myth is made? I brought her to Crete. I gave her a throne and a crown. I made her the mother of kings. And from our union a kingdom was born. But a god's touch leaves a mark, a stain of the unnatural. Our son Minos inherited my power, but also my paranoia. And a curse followed my touch. A creature was born into my son's house, the Minotaur. A lonely abomination with the head of a bull and the body of a man. A living, breathing symbol of my fleeting desire. To hide this divine shame, my son built his famous labyrinth, a monument to his own fear. And to feed the monster within that prison, other children, the flower of Athens, had to be sacrificed year after year. Think of it. My single selfish act of love demanded a recurring payment in mortal blood. I sought a moment of freedom on the waves, and the ripple effect of that moment was a kingdom built on terror and a maze designed to contain a monster of my own making. His eyes shift, moving to the next sorrowful image in his gallery. Then there is Danae. I remember her not for her beauty, but for her solitude. A princess locked in a bronze tower by a father terrified of a prophecy. I saw in her a reflection of my own lonely cage, and I sought to comfort her. I became a shower of gold, a gentle light in her darkness. Our union was a secret, a quiet rebellion against the tyranny of her father and of fate. But a god's comfort is a dangerous thing. Our son Perseus was born, and the prophecy that so terrified her father now had a face and a name. He cast them both out to sea in a wooden chest. I, the Lord of the sky, could only watch, whispering to the winds and the currents to guide them to safety. I learned a bitter lesson. Then my power could shake the heavens, but it could not mend the foolish, frightened hearts of mortal kings. Perseus survived. He grew into a hero. But what is a hero if not a man forged in tragedy? His life was a series of violent necessities. I watched as he was sent to kill the Gorgon Medusa, and I felt the universe twist in a knot of cruel irony. I sent a son born of my pity to kill a woman who had been destroyed by my brother's lust and my daughter's pride. We gods. We are so often sending our children to clean up the messes of our kin. It is a terrible repeating pattern. But the final ripple of that golden shower was the most terrible of all. Perseus returned a celebrated hero. He took part in funeral games and he threw a discus. A stray gust of wind, perhaps one of my own careless breaths, caught it, and it flew into the crowd, striking his grandfather Acrisius, the very man who had imprisoned his mother. The prophecy was fulfilled. The king was killed by his grandson. My intervention, my act of comfort, it changed nothing. It only made the path to the inevitable conclusion more bloody and infinitely more tragic. I learned then that trying to outwit fate is a fool's game even for a god. You do not break the script. You merely find yourself cast in a more complicated and sorrowful role. He falls silent, the weight of that particular memory heavy upon him. Finally, he turns to the last and most terrible portrait in his gallery. And Leda, he says, his voice barely a whisper. Her beauty was a danger to the stillness of the world. I approached her as a swan, an act of reverence, I told myself. A moment of pure aesthetic connection. But the consequences of that one moment still echo in the halls of the dead. From our union came Helen, a face so beautiful it became an excuse for 1,000 ships, for greed, for glory, for death. And because of that face, the greatest heroes of an entire generation turned the fields of Troy into a slaughterhouse. Achilles, whose song could have graced the world for a century, chose instead a short, bloody blaze of glory. Hector, a good man, a noble prince who fought only to protect his home, was dragged through the dust behind his killer's chariot. Ajax, a titan among men, was driven to madness and suicide by a petty squabble over armor. I saw it all from here. I heard the screams. I watched the smoke from the burning city rise up to my own palace, a black accusation against the sky. All of it. A decade of war. The fall of a great city. The death of countless heroes. The grief of 1,000,000 widows and orphans. Every single drop of blood and every single tear can be traced back to me. Back to a single selfish afternoon by a river when I admired a woman's beauty and could not leave it alone. He gives a short, bitter laugh. After one of your romantic dalliances leads directly to the sack of a city and the near extinction of its people, you tend to reconsider your approach to courtship. At the very least, you stop transforming into birds. It has proven to be bad for international relations. This then is the truth of my great loves. They are not stories of passion. They are cautionary tales. They are ripples of chaos spreading out from a single careless touch. Each one a testament to the fact that when an immortal god touches the mortal world, he does not elevate it. He breaks it. He leaves behind monsters and prophecies fulfilled in blood and epic poems that reek of smoke and sorrow. They call me a great lover. No, I am a great fool, a fool who mistakes the act of reaching for the act of holding, and I have never, not once in all my eternal life, managed to hold on without crushing the very thing I was trying to touch. The ghostly gallery of mortal lovers fades from the air of Olympus, leaving behind a silence that is colder and more profound than before. Zeus turns his great shadow sweeping across the marble floor, and his gaze, heavy with the weight of all he has just recounted, does not fall upon you nor out into the cosmos. It falls upon the empty throne beside his own. It is a throne of equal majesty, a partner to his power wrought from the same star-flecked stone, and in this moment it seems to be the source of his deepest and most enduring sorrow. There is one last portrait in my gallery. He says, his voice now stripped of all irony, all humor, leaving only the sound of a quiet ancient ache. One that does not hang in the mists of memory, but sits here beside me, day after eternal day. The portrait of my queen. My sister, my wife, Hera. The poets, in their simple, clumsy narratives, call her jealous. They paint her as a shrew, a scold, a creature of endless petty rage. It is such a small, inadequate word for such a vast and magnificent pain. Jealousy is a fleeting mortal affliction, a spark of insecurity that dies as quickly as it is born. What Hera feels, what I have given her, is not jealousy. It is the grief of 1,000 betrayals layered one on top of the other for centuries, until it has become as solid and as cold and as permanent as this marble floor beneath our feet. He walks toward her throne, not his own, and runs his hand over its arm, a gesture of familiarity so intimate it feels almost painful to witness. With my all-seeing eyes, I see more than her public fury. That is for the others. That is the performance of a slighted queen. What I see are the moments she believes no one is watching. I see the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in her hand as she raises a goblet of nectar to her lips after I have returned from one of my excursions. I see the way she stares into the embers of the great hearth after a feast, her eyes holding a stillness that is far more devastating than any storm she could ever unleash upon the world. I see the invisible cracks that my actions have etched upon her proud, immortal heart. I remember returning once after a dalliance with a nymph in the forests of Arcadia. I returned to this hall expecting a tempest. Instead, there was only silence. She was sitting on her throne looking out at the sky. She did not turn to me. She only said, her voice devoid of all emotion, "Is the world of mortals so much more compelling than your own home, my king?" The question was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, and it was more damning than any curse she could have uttered. After so many centuries, he continues, a note of profound weariness entering his voice. We have reached what you might call an understanding. It is not a peace. A peace is impossible now. It is a routine, a terrible eternal orbit. I understand that my nature, my inescapable hunger for the fleeting warmth of mortality, will lead me to betray her trust. And she understands that her nature as the goddess of marriage, as the symbol of fidelity itself, will lead her to a fury that is as magnificent as it is righteous. It is a tiresome, heartbreaking drama. But he adds with a deep, shuddering sigh, it is, I suppose, our drama. The one constant in a universe of change. There is a certain terrible comfort in its predictability. I know the shape of her anger before it forms in her heart. She knows the weakness in my apologies before the words leave my lips. We are two stars locked in a decaying orbit forever, pulling at each other forever, knowing the inevitable lonely path. The poets see only the fury. They do not see the cause. They do not see the king who is too weak to be faithful and the queen who is too strong to leave. He turns away from her throne and looks back at his own, and now you see it, as he does not as a seat of glory, but as the very engine of his sorrow. And here, my friend, lies the final, cruelest irony of my long existence, the one truth that sits at the very heart of my eternal prison. I told you that I sought the warmth of mortals to escape the cold solitude of this throne. I sought fleeting moments of connection to fill the great empty expanse of my own divinity. I told myself it was a search for life, for feeling, for something real. But every time I reached for that warmth outside these hallowed walls, I only brought a deeper, more biting frost back with me. Every affair, every broken promise, every child born of my wanderings only made this palace colder. It made the silence between us heavier. It made the throne beside me feel emptier. In my desperate search to escape my own prison, I only succeeded in reinforcing its bars, and I locked her in here with me. That is the truth. She is the only other being in all of creation who truly shares the burden of this rain, the only one who sees the world from this same lonely, windswept height. And she is the one I have hurt the most consistently, the most profoundly. Her throne is not just a seat of power. It is a cage, a mirror to my own, and I am the one who forged its bars. I am her jailer, and she, with her righteous, unending pain, is mine. He walks slowly back and sinks into his own throne. The weight of all he has confessed seems to settle upon him, and he looks once more like the figure you first saw, a king. Yes, but a king overwhelmed by the sheer scale of his own existence. So this is who I am. Not the thunderer of legend, not the great lover of song, but a king haunted by the ghosts of his own choices. A god who envies the brief, beautiful lives of mortals. A husband who has shattered the heart of the one woman who could have been his solace. And a prisoner on a throne at the very top of the world. The night grows deep even here on Olympus, and the silence returns. Listen to it. It is the sound of my kingdom. It is the sound of my solitude. And now perhaps you understand it a little better. Now, rest. For you at least the morning will bring a new day, a new beginning. For me, it will only bring more of the same. And so we leave him there on his throne of stone and stars, wrapped in the profound silence of his own creation. The last echo of his confession fades, and the cold, thin air of Olympus once again belongs only to the wind and the endless watching cosmos. We came to this peak seeking the story of a king, and we found the story of a prisoner. We came for the secrets of a god, and we found the weary, aching heart of a man. The master of the universe, it turns out, is a master of nothing but his own solitude, forever looking down upon a world whose greatest gift, its fleeting, fragile beauty, is the one thing he can never truly possess. He is a tragic figure not of power, but of perspective. He sees too much to ever know peace. He hears too much to ever find quiet. As you lie here now in the quiet kingdom of your own room, nestled in the safety of your own bed, perhaps you feel the weight of your own world upon your shoulders. The worries of tomorrow, the regrets of yesterday, the small anxious burdens that we all carry. They can feel as heavy as the sky itself. But as you listen to the story of Zeus, know this: even the king of the gods feels that weight magnified 1,000,000,000 times over. And yet the universe continues. The stars continue to turn. Your burdens, though they feel immense, are a part of your own beautiful finite story, the very story a lonely god might envy. They are proof that you are living, feeling, changing. Unlike the cold, unchanging marble of Olympus, your life is a warm, blazing fire. And now it is time to let that fire dim, to bank the embers, and let the quiet darkness soothe you. So let them go. Let the weight of your crown, whatever it may be, dissolve into the pillow beneath your head. Feel your own throne, your bed support you completely. There are no prophecies to fear here. No cosmic wars to wage. There are no betrayals to mourn. There is only the gentle, steady, and reassuring rhythm of your own breathing. Inhale the peace of the night. Exhale the worries of the day. Sink deeper now. Deeper into the comfort and the quiet. Let your thoughts drift like clouds across the night sky, shapeless and without purpose. Your only task now is to release, to let go. The story is over. The day is done. If this journey to the peak of Olympus brought you a measure of peace tonight, I would be honored if you would leave a comment below sharing the city or country from which you are now drifting off to sleep. It is always a wonder to see where our shared dreams connect across the globe. A subscription is a quiet promise to meet again in another story, and a simple like lets these ancient voices know that even after all this time, they are still heard. Until our next journey together, may your burdens be light, and may your sleep be deep and dreamless. Good night.